Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Leadership series. Today is Harnessing Emotional Intelligence for Better Leadership, and it's being presented by Sue Anderson. Sue Anderson is a dedicated human resources professional with over 35 years of experience in both the public and private sector. Prior to her retirement, Sue spent 15 years at the University of California System, serving at both the Riverside and San Diego campuses as the director of the Staff Education and Development function. She also served as the UCR Staff Assembly President from 2009 to 2010 and as the CUCSA Senior Delegate and Secretary. Her professional passions are diversity, education, change management, leadership development, and performance improvement. She is currently serving as a consultant to various UC locations and supports work around performance appraisals and equity and diversity. She holds a Master's of Science degree in Industrial Organizational Psychology from California State University, San Bernardino, and is a member of the Association for Psychological Science, SciChI, the National Honor Society in Psychology. I hope I said that correctly. Thank you, Sue, for being here today.
Okay, Kate, thank you so much for that introduction. And it's truly a pleasure to be here and have been invited to speak for UCR Lead on a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. It has also been a pleasure to be back in the UCR environment. I'm supporting HR as we roll out a new performance appraisal project, a pilot project. So again, thank you for everyone being here this morning. So I want to consider these two situations. You've just worked very hard on a project. You're really proud of that project. You take it to a colleague and they take a look at it and they make a face. And not only are they not impressed, but they have a lot of constructive criticism for you on how you could have done this better. You feel your face starts to get flushed, you start to feel angry, and you lash out. And the minute the words come out of your mouth, you see the expression on your colleague's face and you regret what you said. Let's look at another situation. You're a leader and you have an unmanageable workload and you're under immense time pressure, and a direct report comes to your door with yet another question on a project. And it's just the last straw, and you lash out at that direct report. And again, you feel horrible the minute the words are out of your mouth, and there's a lot to recover from for both you and for that direct report in reestablishing the relationship that you had. What just happened in these situations? What happened was that the emotional part of your brain just hijacked your rational thinking. Something called your amygdala in your brain controls our emotions, and they're powerful. They can commandeer all of our rational thinking. And that's what happens sometimes. And what we're going to look at for the next hour or so is the importance of understanding emotional intelligence, its competencies, and developing those competencies so you have a little bit more control over that emotional part of your brain. So I'm going to focus and talk about leadership quite a bit, but this presentation is really for everyone, whether you're in a leadership position or not, because the more emotionally intelligent people there are in the work environment, the better the work environment is. So as we go through this, especially first part of the presentation, let's think about our emotions as the lion, and let's think about emotional intelligence strategies and developing those competencies as the lion tamer. The emotions, the lions, are always more powerful, but we can tame that if we practice emotional intelligence competencies. I also use the lion theme because Lion King happens to be one of my favorite movies. So what we're going to do is first start out by reviewing emotional intelligence, the domains and competencies. This probably will be a review for many of you. Then we'll look at emotional intelligence and leadership styles. Then we'll spend some time focusing on focus. Very interesting, relatively new research about the importance of being able to focus your attention for a period of time without distractions. And then because an hour is simply not enough time to cover everything, I'm going to leave you with many resources, many of which I'll share with you during the presentation, so you can go ahead and delve into the topic at your leisure. The basis of my presentation is from the work of Daniel Goleman. His name is most often associated with emotional intelligence. He's a psychologist. He's also a scientific journalist. He helped establish the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations at Rutgers University, and that will be one of the links that you're provided with in your research. He's written numerous books on the topic of emotional intelligence, and although he did not originate the construct, what he has done is really translate it through his books and made it very accessible and applicable to lay people. And so it makes it very practical and understandable, and enables us to use it. So again, what I'll be presenting is really based on his work around emotional intelligence. So let's get started by looking at the domains and the competencies that make up emotional intelligence. And we'll look just briefly at each one of these. Overall, our definition of emotional intelligence is the capacity to be aware and control our emotions, and also understand the emotions of others. So we have 4 domains. We have self-awareness and self-management, which are inner focused. And then we have social awareness and relationship management, which are outer focused. And within these 4 domains, there are 12 competencies. Now, this model has evolved over the years. So there used to be 18 competencies. So you may see in other literature, other competencies, but these again are the 12 that we're going to work with today. Sometimes you'll also see motivation as a 5th domain, motivation being that need to achieve and demonstrate commitment to a task or a project. So why does emotional intelligence matter at all? Decades of research have looked at the connection between high performers and their demonstration of emotional intelligence competencies. And basically, high performers are perceived as having more emotional intelligence than poor performers. And individuals who don't demonstrate emotional intelligence, typically, that is a predictor of their failure, or in terms of sometimes derailment, going off track with their career. So there's definitely a lot of empirical support for demonstrating these competencies as a means of becoming more successful as a leader or in any position that you hold. So let's start and take a quick look at self-awareness. Self-awareness is basically knowing what you're feeling in the moment and having a realistic assessment of your ability, a sense of self-confidence. Also, what I like to call the ability to read the room, the ability to recognize how you are being experienced by other people and how your behavior is impacting them. One of the best ways to determine how self-aware you are is to participate in a 360-degree feedback instrument. This is something that's probably familiar to you. This is a tool that allows you to ask people that know you how they observe you performing certain behaviors. And you also take an assessment and you rate yourself. And then there's a comparison made between how people have rated you on things such as providing feedback or optimism, and how you rate yourself on those characteristics and behaviors. So if you really want to get in touch with how you are demonstrating emotional intelligence competence, a 360 tool would be a great place to start. And I give you a resource and a reference for that. A cheaper, much quicker way to do a self-assessment is a little activity we'll do right now. I'm going to give you about 30 to 45 seconds, and I want you to write down 3 words or small phrases, brief phrases that describe you. 3 words or brief phrases that describe you. So I'll give you 30 seconds to do that right now. So hopefully everyone has those down. Now, after this presentation, what I'd like you to do is ask 5 people that know you to describe you in 3 words or small phrases, brief phrases, and then do a comparison to see what your perception of yourself is. Again, we're not talking a scientific method here, but a very general description of yourself, and see how that compares to how other people see you. So just a fun, quick, easy way to just do self-assessment on your self-awareness. Let's look at the next domain of emotional intelligence, which is self-management. And it has to do with handling your own emotions so that you facilitate rather than interfere with the task at hand. It also can pertain to recovering well from emotional distress. So in self-management, resilience plays a part in that, but it's keeping those disruptive emotions in check. The self-management is something that you certainly can learn and learn to improve, but it is something that is absolutely essential in demonstrating emotional intelligence competence. The examples I gave at the beginning of the presentation represented individuals that were not able to have the self-control to keep their mouth shut in situations when they should have, and were not able to calm their emotions and then speak more appropriately. Acting in congruence with your values sometimes represents a way of self-management. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're at a point now where you really want to value your health, and maybe you have been a smoker all your life, so you've decided, I'm not going to smoke anymore. That behavior is going to align with my increased focus on better health. But what if you slip? And what if you slip and have a cigarette in a stressful situation? Suddenly your behavior is not matching your values. So that's just an example of what that might look like. So how do you control yourself, your language, your expressions when you're under emotional stress? Well, research tells us that it takes about 90 seconds for an emotion to pass. So the key is keeping yourself distracted or occupied for a minute or 90 seconds so that, again, your rational part of your brain can take over and you can respond to the situation in a more appropriate way. There's lots of ways you can do this. You can take a drink of water. If you're face-to-face or Zoom-to-Zoom with someone, you can look away from the person. But there's another tool I'd like to share with you, which is the 5-4-3-2-1 method. As you feel yourself starting to get emotional, whatever that may feel like to you, identify 5 things that you can see. Identify 4 things around you that you can touch. Identify 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And that increases the likelihood, as you have worked through your 5-4-3-2-1, that 60 to 90 seconds has probably passed. So the rational brain has time to kick in, and now your response, your response might look much different than it would have if you had given your initial reaction. There are several of these different tools. I'm going to show you a website that'll provide a lot of them for you. But again, keeping your mind distracted is a way to control yourself and self-manage yourself. Let's look now at the outward-facing domains. Let's look first at social awareness. Competencies related to social awareness include empathy. And empathy is a really hot topic right now in leadership development, as well as it should be. It's so essential. It's such an essential skill for leaders to have. Organizational awareness is also a competency. Organizational awareness has to do with understanding the environment around you. Social awareness, other awareness is people. Organizational awareness are the things that influence your work environment. In the university setting, one of those external factors is always funding, right? Where is the funding coming from? Do we have enough funding? That's definitely something that impacts your work environment as a leader. It can really impact you. But let's take a deeper look at other awareness and empathy. There's three types of empathy. The first one is a cognitive empathy. And cognitive empathy means you understand how a person feels or what they might be thinking. It would involve perspective taking. So you're kind of putting yourself in that person's shoes to understand what the emotion is that they're going through at the moment. Emotional empathy is when you share the feelings with someone else. You could express it as your pain in my heart. You really immerse yourself in the emotion that that person is feeling. So that's emotional empathy is very connective with an individual, but there's some danger in there that you might get sucked into how they're feeling as well. So remember, power under control. You don't want to go too far with emotional empathy. The final type of emotion is actually compassion. And this goes beyond just the thinking and the feeling part. Compassion goes to action. That means that you're able to do something perhaps to help them in their situation. An analogy for this might be that you're walking along and you discover a pit and there's someone in this pit. Well, a cognitive type of response to that might be that, I understand that's probably a problem for you. I can even imagine being in the pit and looking up at you outside of the pit. An emotional empathy response to the poor person in the pit might be that you jump in there with them because you're just that connected to them. A compassionate response to that person in the pit would be that you recognize the distress and you go get a rope and you put the rope down there to help pull them out. So not that the important piece here is that you display empathy if you're demonstrating that competency of emotional intelligence, and maybe you become nuanced enough to recognize, oh, I might be too emotional in my empathy. I need to be more compassionate. So one of the ways that we can cue in on how someone else is feeling is through their facial expressions, correct? We know that words communicate very little to us. What we read as humans, what signals we get from other people come from tone of voice, come from body language, come from facial expression. So if you want to develop empathy, a good way to do that is really get better at reading people's expressions. So I want to introduce you to a website that comes from our friends at Berkeley. And this is just a fantastic resource if you have never been to the site or discovered it. The Greater Good Science Center, and I'm going to read their description to you so I do it justice. The Greater Good Science Center studies the psychology, sociology, and neuroscience of well-being and teaches skills that foster a thriving, resilient, and compassionate society. It's unique in its commitment to both science and practice. And not only do they sponsor groundbreaking scientific research into social and emotional well-being, we help people apply this research to their personal and professional lives. So one of the things you can do if you visit the site is you can sign up for their actually daily articles they send out. And they also have a Greater Good magazine. And within the magazine section, they have, as you can see, the videos and podcasts, but they have quizzes on all sorts of elements of emotional and social well-being. So you can do some self-assessments to see how well you're demonstrating some of these behaviors that lead to better wellness. Well, they have one for emotional intelligence. So I thought it might be fun for us to try to see how well we can really read emotions in others. So this is how it will work. I'll show you a picture like this one, and then they give you 4 options of what that face is expressing. So I'll give everybody a second to look at this face and then determine if it's embarrassment, fear, sadness, or surprise. Hopefully everyone has their answer. You make your selection, and then it gives you the answer, and then a little bit of a narrative on why that particular face is expressing that emotion. Write down to what to look for eyebrows, eyelids, and lips. And of course, I don't have the whole description here, Let's do another one. So what is this young man expressing? I got this one wrong when I did it. I thought he was expressing disgust, but what he was expressing was anger. And again, they show you all the reasons that this would be expressing anger. Now we'll do one more. This particular one happened to be challenging for me. Hopefully everybody has that. And it was embarrassment. So with the reasons there. So there are 20 different facial expressions, again, on this Greater Good Science Center website. So I would invite you to check that out. And again, just give yourself some feedback on how well are you able to really tell the emotion or understand the emotion someone is sending you so that you can show the right kind of empathy. One thing also sometimes around empathy and being empathetic with someone is that they may not be looking for the solution from you. What they're looking for is just the connection that somebody else is experiencing this with them. And sometimes connection phrases can be important to have at the ready when you need to speak with someone. One that I particularly like is that I can't imagine what you're going through, but I'm so glad you shared it with me. Sometimes we don't know what to say to someone who might be in distress, but just letting them know that we appreciate that they shared it with us helps to form that connection that they may need. So this is our look at social awareness. And our last area, again, this is other focused domains and skills, is relationship management, which is an absolutely huge area. And if you look at the list here of the competencies that comprise the relationship management domain, it looks like the agenda for a leadership training, doesn't it? These are all the things that good leaders need to develop. And what do you know? They're all related to emotional intelligence. So that kind of takes us out of our overview here of emotional intelligence and the competencies that are there. Again, as a training professional at heart, these are all things that you can develop. If you want to develop emotional intelligence, here's a place to start. So the self-assessment identifies the areas where you're strong and where you could be stronger, and then you identify the specific area of development. 360-degree feedback assessment is really the best mechanism for getting that development plan started. So let's switch gears a little bit and let's take a look at how emotional intelligence impacts leadership, and especially leadership styles. So I'm going to give you about 30 to 60 seconds. And I want you to think of the best leader you've ever known, maybe someone you know personally, maybe somebody you admire from afar. And I want you to list the 5 characteristics or behaviors that they demonstrate that lead you to the conclusion that they're a great leader. So I'll give you about 30 to 60 seconds to jot those down. Okay, hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to do that. As I mentioned before, there's really decades of research on emotional intelligence and its impact on organization success and individual success, and also on the importance of this to leadership. So emotional intelligence competence alone will not make you a great leader. There's this thing called IQ that you need to have as well. But again, in a very general summation of the research in this area, leaders without emotional intelligence, they derail. Why do they derail? Because they create negative, toxic environments, and people don't want to stay there. The definition of a leader or a manager is someone who gets work done through others. If you don't have the competence to inspire and motivate and guide and coach people, you have a hard time getting work done through others. We'll look at the styles in a moment, but I've always thought the easy way to manage is just simply to tell people, go do what I tell you to do because I'm the boss. It's the easy way. It might be effective for a little while, but it won't be effective for the long term. The more effective way is the harder way and the more challenging way sometimes, but that is the use of emotional intelligence competencies. In Daniel Goleman's book, Primal Leadership is one of those management classic books. It's from the mid-90s. If you haven't read it, you should read it. Of course, being that old, a lot of things now have evolved, but the core essence of the book still is very applicable. And what Goleman says, and what I believe, is that great leadership works through emotions. Look back on that list you just created of the characteristics of the leader you thought of. How many of those things were related necessarily to IQ? Like, oh, they prioritized really well. They really knew how to write a job description or a report. How many of those things related to EI competencies? They inspired me. They created a vision for me to follow. They gave me feedback. They made me feel good about what I was doing. Typically, when you think of those people that are the best managers that you've had, you probably have a list a little bit skewed towards more emotional intelligence competence rather than IQ. So let's take a little dive into why emotional intelligence has such an impact, why this leader's emotional intelligence can have such an impact. We'll delve into a little bit of brain science. So the brain is an open loop, and we rely on connections with other people for our emotional stability. So the open loop system is when a person transmits signals to us. What kind of signals? Well, facial expression, tone of voice, body language, words. They communicate that to us. And by that communication, they can change our hormone levels. They can change our cardiovascular system. They can even change the immune functions within our body. That's a lot of control, isn't it? Just by the signals another person sends to us. And you know, I like to think in the positive. When you think of that significant other that's so important to you, and you see that person, and you know what we say, your heart skips a beat? Well, your heart literally might skip a beat because that signal and that feeling we have for that person can change us physiologically. So when you put a group of people together at work, it creates kind of an emotional soup. Everybody's adding their flavor. Everybody's adding those signals. So then you have your leader, and your leader has tremendous influence over the type of soup you serve. A leader that does not have emotional intelligence is going to lead that group into a path of negative emotions. And I'm sure if you've worked any length of time, you've been there. So no one's focusing on work because everyone's talking about how bad things are and how bad they feel. And we wish if we only had a different leader, things would be better. Conversely, a leader that adds the positive emotions to the soup, people are happy. Why do we focus on job satisfaction? Because happy people are more productive. Happy people can focus on the task because they don't have to worry about all these negative emotions that they're trying to solve. So emotional intelligence has long been linked to business results. And research decades ago, and it's been supported over the years, shows that leaders that have strengths in 6 or more of the emotional intelligence competencies are far more effective than those leaders who lack those strengths. So I just showed you 12 of those competencies. So again, what is your strength level in those competencies? Research says you've got to be competent in at least 6 of them to really be effective. So one study set out to define the leadership and how leadership and emotional intelligence affected performance and climate and things of that nature in the work environment. And the researchers studied over 3,000 executives. They looked at how they handled crises, how they motivated direct reports, and how they managed change. And from this, 6 leadership styles were discovered. And then later they mapped the emotional intelligence competencies to the styles that were identified. So this is an illustration of the 6 styles and a little phrase that kind of describes that style. So the commanding, do what I tell you. The visionary, come with me. The affiliative, people come first. The democratic, what do you think? The pace setting, do as I do now. And then the coaching, let's try this. So you can probably tell by these descriptions that there's 2 of these styles that may not create that positive emotional environment that we want. You're right. Commanding and pace setting. I could read your thoughts. So, but all of these styles are important to a leader. You need to be flexible because there are certain times when a commanding style is necessary. You know, you think of times of crisis, not time to be democratic. We just have to do what we need to do now. And that's fine. There's a place for it, but it shouldn't be the default style. So the visionary, affiliative, democratic, and coaching styles, well, those are the ones that obviously are going to create a more positive work environment. When we take this to the next step and we look at then the underlying emotional intelligence competencies related to each of these styles, you'll see that for most of the positive styles, empathy is one of those competencies. The connection with the people that you lead is really everything. And it can be expressed in different ways, but the empathy really needs to be there. The commanding style, the pace setting style, the primary driver is the need to achieve, that achievement orientation at all costs. This is the leader that doesn't have competence in understanding their impact on others. And also, they really don't care how they're impacting you. This is the leader that says, here's the project deadline. I know it's aggressive. I know you don't have enough staff to do it, but it needs to be done. Just find a way to get it done. A zero lack of compassion or empathy for the staff that they're managing. So again, if you're looking for a way to develop a particular leadership style, or you want to find out what your default style is, there is an assessment that goes along with these styles, but I really think any kind of leadership assessment is probably going to get you to the same place. And I wanted to kind of give you an illustration of these styles in action, which it just so happened, it just was very timely given my presentation to you today. Last week, I was invited to the Central Human Resources Retreat, and I was going to present a little piece on our new performance appraisal pilot project. So I was able to attend the whole thing, and Alex, the new CHRO, he opened up the meeting in a very affiliative style. Many of you, if you have heard him at all, he usually mentions the importance of well-being as one of his values. So as he opens up this important meeting with the staff of Central HR, he makes it very clear that he's concerned about their well-being. And he wants everyone to be grounded and in a good space and to be able to then carry out the vision that he has for Central Human Resources. So just within the course of 30 minutes, I watched him move from a very affiliative leader to a visionary leader. Empathy was the theme throughout his presentation. And then he kind of added some of that spice of self-confidence and relationship building in there as well. So I'd invite you to look back or think about that leader that I had you think about as we started this section of the presentation, and maybe think about, well, what style of leader was I working for, or was I thinking of? Thinking about some of those behaviors, how do they align with these different leadership styles? And again, there's several leadership assessments. Alex Rollins, your director of EOD, would be the resource there to point you in what's available to you through UCR, and be looking for whatever instrument you use. have these emotional intelligence competencies in mind to see which align with the styles. So now for the final bit of information I have for you today, we're going to turn our attention to focus. A wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. Truer words were never spoken in our world today. We are inundated by so much information. So we're stimulated so much all the time. And I don't think we need to spend any time trying to make the case that we have a lot of distractions. A fact about focusing. Your mind has probably wandered or zoned out about 20 to 40% of the time that I have been presenting. I'm not offended. It's just the way that we're built. Zoom does not help because when all I can see on the screen is your name, I have no idea what else you're doing behind the scenes. And as a facilitator, I thank you to the people that are on camera, so I'm getting some feedback from you. So the distractions are there. People zone out. As a matter of fact, in this little snippet of a presentation I'm going to make on focus, 20 to 40% of you, or 20-40% of the time, you might be zoning out. And we'll test that theory by having a little quiz at the end. So again, from Daniel Goleman, we're going to take a look at 3 types of focus and what we can do to strengthen our awareness and be more disciplined about what we're thinking about. This is something called cognitive control. Cognitive control means you control what you're thinking about. You allow your mind to wander at some times, but then you also focus when it's important to focus. So it isn't random and you happen to say, oh, how fascinating, I'm actually able to focus right now. You know, you willfully control that type of focus. So in researching this, what was interesting to find out is usually focus isn't fully developed until your 3rd decade of life. But think about it. A lot of times you hear people say, oh, I was so crazy in my youth. I'm glad I've settled down now. Well, you were working on that cognitive control and that focus and that self-management and willpower. What's really going on here is sort of a battle between open awareness versus selective attention. So open awareness allows different stimuli to move through our consciousness. Selective attention allows us to bring into focus something specific, sustain attention on it, and ultimately learn. This is the way we learn, by having focused attention on a topic. I know you've all experienced it. I've experienced it throughout my career. You're in a training and the presenter has just gone over the same concept 3 times. And they ask, does anyone have any questions? And someone has a question related to what was just said. Have you been there? Well, that's because they were distracted. People that are communication experts tell us that how many times does a message have to be communicated before people finally receive it? 5 to 7. Why is that? Because they know people are distracted. So open awareness isn't a bad thing. Mind wandering, we could also call it, because it really makes us receptive to different thoughts. It's been shown that the systems in the mind that light up when someone is having an MRI done, where mind wandering is happening, the parts of the brain responsible for creative insight light up. So it's a way that encourages creativity. And actually in ADHD adults, they exhibit high levels of creative thought. But ultimately, you should be able to switch from open awareness to narrow focus consciously. It should be an active choice. Because if we let our mind wander, not, on its own, it tends to skew towards unpleasant thoughts, things that might make us unhappy or stressed out. So it's important to have that control. The good news is, with practice on focusing, you can strengthen the neural circuitry that helps you have more selective attention. So you might think, why is this important to leadership? Well, it's important to be able to concentrate to get something done. Again, a leader is trying to move a group of people towards a certain objective and goal. What happens sometimes? Obstacles get in the way, challenges. the priority shift, all those things could be distractors, but a leader needs to have selective attention, singular focus on getting that objective met, despite the distractions that might try to veer them off the path. So focus isn't just something that helps develop a leader. It's also been shown to be a better predictor of success later in life than IQ. It's crucial for self-management, and also it's the core of willpower. So I'd like to share with you a study, a remarkable study that has proven how important self-control is, not only to a leader, but to success in life. So again, I'm going to quote from this just to make sure I get this right. This is called the Dunedin study. Dunedin is a small city on the South Island of New Zealand, and it has followed the lives of 1,037 babies that were born in between 1972 and 1973. You may have heard of this. It's in its fifth decade, and it's produced over 1,300 research publications and reports. And many of them have influenced or informed policymakers. I'll tell you in a moment how a part of this study is helping to inform policymakers in our own country. So after one of the things that they measured in these children was their ability to demonstrate self-control. Excuse me. So for the first decade of these children's lives, they measured how much self-control they exhibited. And they found that even after accounting for the members' differences in social status and IQ, 45 years later, the children who had lower self-control as 3-year-olds were more likely to have physical health problems, substance abuse problems, difficulty with financial planning, difficulty with money, and difficulty with the law, criminal convictions, than the children at 3-year-olds that exhibited more self-control. So the ability to control your behaviors and your thoughts, again, according to this study, shows that you are able to be more successful, in this case, in life, based on these variables. So if this is an empirical fact, and there's researchers at UC Davis that study this as well, that was very interesting to me. But if this is a fact that if we could help our children learn how to develop skills for more self-control, it could lead to more successful adults later in life. So elements of this study are actually being used in Washington to try to introduce in public schools sessions on self-control for elementary school age children. Currently, I've seen news articles where children are being taught meditation techniques where they simply focus on their breathing. That's the kind of instruction these policies are trying to make happen. Because if we teach children to have self-control now when they're young, it could result in better results in their life. So again, the impact of being able to focus is tremendous. What Goleman has done in his book called Focus is that says there's 3 areas of focus that we need to have. We need to have an inner focus on ourselves. We need to reflect. We need to know what we want. We need to determine our values. We need to have an other focus. We need to manage our relationships. We need to invest in our relationships by focusing on what others need from us. And then we need that outer focus. We need to understand what's going on around us so we can understand how our behaviors impact the larger environment. He puts it in terms of like climate change. So we need to focus on how our actions impact the environment. How we relate this to emotional intelligence. Of course, inner focus is going to help us develop more self-awareness and self-management. Other focus is going to help us with our social awareness and empathy. And that outer focus can help us also with organizational awareness. So 3 areas where we need to control our thoughts and focus. So it's time for that little quiz that I mentioned. And if you didn't know we were having a quiz, then you were zoning out when I was talking about it. So how much were you zoning out while I was explaining this? Very simple. No scores need to be revealed. A 2-item quiz. Where was the significant study conducted that assessed the importance of self-control? And the answer is Dunedin, New Zealand. And what are the 3 types of focus according to Goleman? Inner, other, and outer. So hopefully everyone got an A+ and was tuned in and focused enough to capture that information. So we're going to do one more exercise before our time together comes to a close. And again, comes from the Greater Good Science Center. Great article on how to focus a wandering mind. But I'm going to show you the technique right now, and it's very simple. So many things related to focus and inner reflection have you focus on your breathing. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So for 1 minute, I'm going to ask you to focus on your breathing. And you don't need to do anything deep in and deep out, just your regular breathing. If your mind starts to wander, notice that it's wandering because you're supposed to be focusing on your breathing. You might want to make a little tick mark every time your mind wanders. If it wanders, bring your mind back to your breathing and focus on your breathing. So I'm going to time us for 1 minute, and then I'll be interested to see your responses, how many times your mind might have wandered. So we'll start now. Okay, it's been a minute. That seemed like a long minute, didn't it? To try to stay focused on one thing. So let's throw in the chat how many times your mind wandered, if you feel comfortable sharing that. Most of the time. 4, 3, 2. So a little activity just to illustrate how challenging it is to keep our focus, just selective attention on one thing, but so critical to success, so critical to supporting the use of those emotional intelligence competencies where you need to focus on yourself, you need to focus on others. Again, this can be improved. So if this is something that maybe you would want to develop, a simple activity like this that you do maybe once or twice a day can help you down the path to that development. So in summary, I think we've established that emotional intelligence is critical to leadership success. I've always promoted that you need to know yourself. You need to know yourself in many different arenas. If you're a leader, you need to know your supervisory style, your communication style, your change management style, your conflict management style. There's just so many assessments that are available to you, so you can really have a good sense of self and self-awareness. And then cognitive control, as we've just talked about, so important to just control your thoughts and not let that mind wander uncontrollably, but again, helping you to be a better leader, a better colleague, and supporting emotional intelligence. So that's what I had for you today. I think we may have just a few minutes if anyone has any questions on anything. And then I know Kate is going to distribute in the chat the list of resources that relate to many of the things that I brought up in the presentation. And I put my email address there too. So if you'd like more information, if you want to challenge something I've shared with you, just shoot me an email and I'm happy to respond to that.
And while everyone is downloading that amazing resource that Sue gave us, if you have any questions, please put in the chat. And Sue, I just want to say thank you so much for your knowledge and your expertise on this subject. We really appreciate you having you here. And that was great. So thank you. If you have any questions, please put in the chat, or you can come off mute and we can have some discussion.
Thank you, Alex, for those remarks. Pleasure to be here. My email should be at the top of that document. So I don't know that I see any questions. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity. Wish you all a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Sue.
Bye.